What is up, Mets fans? Welcome back to a special episode of the Mets'd podcast. As you can tell, we are joined today with a guest, Mets beat writer of Newsday Sports, Tim Healey, joining us live, boots on the ground from Port St. Lucie. We weirdly did this episode with Tim almost exactly a year to the day that we're recording it right now. So, Tim, I guess, I guess March 5th is going to be every year. You can just expect to be on the Mets'd podcast. How you doing? What's going on?
I'm doing great. Spring training just passed the halfway mark already, which seems super fast to me, but so far so good down here. Absolutely.
I mean, Tim, we asked you this question last year, and it kind of led to a lot of good graces for the Mets team, the Mets organization, everything about the whole team. So what's the vibe right now at camp? How are players feeling? How are coaches feeling? Like when you're there every single day, day after day, what's the feeling that's emanating from the squad?
The vibe is frankly normal and unremarkable. It's a lot of guys who know each other mostly. They brought back more of the 2024 Mets than I expected this offseason, to be honest. Alonso, McNeil, Stanek, Winker. I for sure did not expect all of those faces and names to be back. And then, of course, the big addition was Juan Soto. So a lot of what's new is revolving around him. The Mets are experiencing a little bit of a luxury this year in that there is not a whole lot of getting to know you stuff going on. Carlos Mendoza isn't new anymore. David Stearns isn't new anymore. The entire coaching staff is back, which is not normal for the Mets over the past decade or so. So a lot of what is new is about Juan Soto. And frankly, he seems to be blending in seamlessly. You've seen it in the SNY broadcast when he's goofing around with mostly the Latino players in the dugout. The same is true during workouts, in the clubhouse. He's one of the guys. For as rich as he is and as good as he is, he's blending right in with all the quote-unquote normal people.
From your time on the field, seeing Juan Soto previously play for the Nationals and the Padres and the Yankees, Is there a different feel or vibe with him right now that he's a little bit more loose and maybe just kind of enjoying it more?
I was never super around him in the past. So I can't speak to that. I can't say with certainty that he is looser or having more fun because for all I know, this is the same Juan Soto that he was with the Nationals or with the Padres, with the Yankees. The Yankees, of course, are always a more corporate operation. They present a more formal, put together image. So I guess Soto kind of blended into that last year. One thing that is striking to me, and I think was striking to Juan Soto when he showed up to Port St. Lucie, was how many Spanish-speaking players there are on the team, which he really didn't have a lot of last year on the Yankees. It was Gleyber Torres, a couple of those young utility guys, and that's close to it. Luis Gil. So, but with the Mets, and Soto called this out in his first press conference on his first day in camp, he was a little surprised at it. It's Francisco Alvarez, Francisco Lindor, Jose Siri, Starling Marte, who he's a big fan of, Jose Azocar, who's a teammate in San Diego and may or may not be on the team in a couple of weeks. We'll have to check back. But there's a big group of guys that he's just being guys with. So he seems to really like that so far.
I feel like on most baseball teams, the de facto leader always kinds up being the guy who gets paid the most money, the best player. Yes. But this Mets team, it definitely won't be that at first because Francisco Lindor has been here for years. He has been the most paid player. Like he is known as the leader, probably the unspoken captain of this team. Has there been any relationship forming at all you've noticed between Lindor and Soto in any way, shape, or form?
Not really. Not any more than any of the other guys. It is an interesting dynamic, as you said, because usually, yes, the highest paid guy is expected to take that on in the way that Max Scherzer did when he was here, in the way that Lindor has, in the way that Brandon Nimmo has the last couple of years. As really, you mentioned Lindor as the leader. I think it's those two guys who are recognized as the leaders. And Lindor, of course, naturally, by virtue of his pay, yes, but also his performance last year really grew into that role, it seemed, in 2024. So whether Juan Soto becomes a leader-type figure, we'll have to see. He's been so young his entire career. He's still only 26 years old that I don't think he did not occupy that role in any of his past teams. The Nationals had a bunch of guys. The Padres had and have Manny Machado, for better or for worse. He was on the Yankees. Aaron Judge is the captain officially. Mm-hmm. So he's never been asked to be a leader. So we'll see how that develops, not just this year, because I don't know. It's usually something that takes more than a year, but over the course of 15 years, there will be time for Juan Soto to become a leader.
Yeah, he's going to have plenty of time to do that. He
So
can grow
much.
into that role as maybe he hits his 30s. He's still 26 years old, as you said, which
Yeah.
is insane. You mentioned about how many Latino players there are on the Mets roster, but also we have one of the Latino managers in baseball with Carlos Mendoza. What differences have you noticed this season in spring training versus last year?
Mendoza's a lot more comfortable. He's more comfortable wandering around camp. He knows everybody. He's more comfortable talking to reporters twice a day, which, he's always been solid at, but didn't seem to love early last camp, which makes sense because it's a new thing and it's a lot. And it's something that you don't do when you're the bench coach, even if you dabble in the interview stuff. So 1 year under his belt makes a lot of difference. He acknowledges openly as much that he doesn't need to meet 20 people a day and then forget the next day that he actually already met somebody. So
Nice.
I think with not only Mendoza, but Stearns as well, the Mets leadership is in place. Whatever learning curve existed last year has been scaled. So they're just full steam ahead. They're a well-oiled machine and operating smoothly, it seems, which, like I said earlier, is a bona fide luxury for the Mets in recent years, given all the turnover they've had in those spots.
One of the big changes going on in baseball, at least spring training right now, is the automatic balls and strike system. How have you seen some of the Mets players respond to the system so far?
Guys love it. And I wrote about this within the last couple of days for Newsday. Newsday.com/Mets. You can still see the story near the top of the list there. People love it. Pete Alonso, first inning of the first exhibition game last month, his first at-bat, challenges it. Not only challenges it, I think just to see how it works, but he was right by the smallest of margins. On the Jumbotron, they showed less that the distance from the strike zone was less than half an inch, which must just be the smallest margin that they will display, because it was way less than half an inch. Alonso likes it. McNeil smiled openly when he got a call overturned. Jeff McNeil, of all people, is going to show how he feels about a ball or strike going his way, challenge system or otherwise. Mendoza likes it, which stands in contrast to Aaron Boone, his good friend, who seems not to like it. So the Mets are all in. And if and when the system comes to the majors next year or the year after, I think they'll adjust just fine.
No, love to hear that. I definitely think we're all in the same agreement of, if it's going to work, it's going to be smooth. We definitely want it there, because some of these calls the umpires have been making recently have been getting in the way a little bit too much. Speaking of which, you brought up that Pete was the first guy to use the ABS for the Mets during spring training. How's Pete been this spring? Because obviously he came in late. He's not really even the number 1 or 2 guy right now on this roster. Yeah. Is it a little bit different spring for Pete than it has felt in the past?
It's different in that he is not a top 2 star on the team, but he honestly seems like his same old self. I was actually just today looking back at some of what I wrote around this time last year in terms of, standard season preview type material. And I had a blurb in Newsday's coverage about Pete Alonso seeming locked in and ready for a big contract year. And obviously that didn't happen. But demeanor-wise, the way he's going about his business, it kind of seems the same. I did expect it last year, and it didn't happen, so maybe this isn't worth a lot, but I do think it's going to be a big year for Pete Alonso. He spent 6 years in the majors, was one of the best sluggers in all of baseball, and baseball as an industry, by virtue of how they viewed him in free agency, basically told him, So I think he's going to have a chip on his shoulder. I think he's due for a big year, and I think he'll be due, this isn't a surprise, but I'm highly, highly likely to opt out of that contract after the first of the 2 years. So far, same old Pete. And if it's the same old Pete, once they take the field for real, that'll be good news for the Mets.
It probably is good for Pete, just watching him grow up as a baseball player, knowing the kind of guy he is, to have less pressure on him with another true unsanctioned slugger in the lineup who everyone knows is going to be the real run-producing guy. There's a couple other players in the lineup, maybe not exactly the everyday lineup, dealing with some injuries right now. We have Brandon Nimmo with the knee and Starling Marte with the body. Is there anything? Is there anything you could really tell us about those guys? Any fear at all about a possible opening to AL stint for either of them?
So not a lot of fear with Brandon Nimmo. He's dealt with plenty of injuries through the years, and he seems to, one, have a good read on the level of seriousness when it comes to his own body, and two, generally is upfront about that. And in this case, he does not seem concerned. He's supposed to be back in the lineup within the next couple of days, so it was interesting that coming off the plantar fasciitis last year, he had that very slow buildup in spring training. And in the past couple of years, and it's been well documented, Brandon Nimmo has been very into the skipping the first bunch of exhibition games, getting into games eventually, getting enough at-bats before opening day, and that's setting him up for playing 150 games. This year, he got into a game on February 28th, which was a couple of days earlier than last year and a week plus earlier than the year before that. So they did that, apparently, on purpose, expecting some minor hiccup, some minor soreness along the way. So when he does get back in the lineup in the next day or two, he'll basically be on schedule. Starling Marte, I don't know what to make of this guy. He had the knee issue last year in like June, if not earlier. Went on the injured list with a bone bruise, came back, apparently was playing through pain down the stretch and in the playoffs, and it bothered him all offseason. And Carlos Mendoza in December at the winter meetings referenced Starling Marte as basically a rehabbing player, even though he finished the year on the field in the lineup. Come to spring training, still basically a rehabbing player, or at least somebody who's getting a slow buildup, and still not in games, supposed to happen soon. I don't know what to expect. Him starting the year on the injured list would not surprise me at all. Starling Marte says he'll be ready. Okay, fine. He probably knows best. Certainly knows better than me. So he says he'll be ready. If he's not, it's probably not that big of a deal, to be honest. The Mets can take a look at another guy like Jose Azocar, previously mentioned, Alexander Canario, recently picked up from the Cubs. Both kind of interesting guys.
Yeah, no, we're kind of like, in a way, it wouldn't be the worst thing ever if Marte needed a little bit more time, because then we could give these guys a shot and see what they've got here. Considering Marte's not really going to play too much, it seems like, every single day. Another guy who could be maybe fighting for a spot where a Starling Marte IL sting could help a little bit is Brett Baty. What's the mood been around his play? Because he's looked fantastic yet again in spring training.
I am back on the Brett Baty bandwagon.
Yes.
You guys' reaction suggests that maybe you're driving the bandwagon. I thought I was driving it a little bit, but you guys are ahead of me, it seems, so I'm happy to just be on as a passenger. But I'm in. It's February, it's March. It's Brett Baty's favorite time of year statistically, so take that for what it's worth in these Grapefruit League games when he always does well. But he's 25 years old. He has had and lost the third base job twice. And now he's in the defensive versatility portion of his career, which, ask Don Smith, isn't always a good thing when they're like, let's see if we can get you some at-bats somewhere else. But I'm curious. He's playing second. He took grounders one day at shortstop. I wrote about it for Newsday that day, that the most remarkable part of that was how unremarkable it was. It seemed pretty normal. Nobody thinks he's going to come take Francisco Lindor's job, or frankly even give Francisco Lindor a day off there. But if he can, as Carlos Mendoza says, stand there for a few innings, finish a game in a blowout, then that might be enough for him to win the utility infielder job. And if he can show something in the part-time role, then maybe that opens the door. Maybe, Mark Vientos doesn't get off to a hot start, has a little bit of problems in what is basically going to be a sophomore year. Maybe Brett Baty gets some at-bats. Maybe Jeff McNeil starts slow. Maybe Brady gets a start once a week at second base. And then something starts to build. So Brett Baty's still interesting. The power's still there. He hits the ball hard as heck. So count me in on taking a look at Brett Baty in some role. Probably, almost certainly part-time to begin the year.
There is definitely something about this point in a player's career, like Baty, you said, had the job and lost it twice at third base. Just your back is against the wall. Like you were the big prospect. Like you were supposed to be the guy. This is more or less going to be your last shot with the team that drafted you, the only team you've ever known. So it's cool to see that he seems like he's really understanding this opportunity and taking that as it is. We're also a few days off of the first round of roster cuts. You said we're about halfway through spring training, and One of the names that got cut wasn't exactly surprising, but was, I guess, maybe a little disappointing, was Brandon Sproat. To be one of the first guys cut, it kind of makes the team lets you know that he didn't really have any shot to be in the opening day roster anyway. Did it ever seem like for a second, especially with the injuries, that he did? And what is the mood around some of those? I know it's just said mood for Brett Baty, but around some of those minor leaguers who have looked so good, especially Sproat and Blade Tidwell early.
Sproat and Tidwell, I put them in the same bucket in a lot of ways, even though Sproat was more highly regarded. Neither had any shot of breaking camp with the team. They could have thrown 15 perfect innings, and they would not have gotten the job over Paul Blackburn.
That's 15 just immaculate innings?
Yeah. That's just the reality they were dealing with this year. The Mets, a lot like Christian Scott at this time last year, want to see them do it in AAA. And both guys got lit up in Syracuse last year. Both guys can do way better than that. Obviously, the unspoken thing is the service time side. So just in terms of a development and pacing and timeline, those guys were not going to be up to begin the year. Probably won't be up in April at all, barring some sort of catastrophe to the rotation depth. That said, both guys are going to be up this year as long as they prove it. The Mets will make openings for them if openings don't create themselves, if they prove it in AAA. We saw Christian Scott in early May last year. There were people within the organization who wanted to see Scott before that, but they held off to early May. So it wouldn't surprise me at all to see one of those guys sooner rather than later. And it might depend on a competition between the two of them in AAA. If one guy's doing great and the other guy's not, that guy's going to get a shot first. As far as the other prospects in camp, a lot of excitement. I was surprised not to see Jet Williams get any reps in center field because the Mets don't have a lot of certainty there, to be honest. Beyond 2025, maybe even within 2025, depending on how Siri and Taylor hit. But there's a version of the future in which Jet Williams is the center fielder of the future. So I thought maybe the big league staff would want to see him in the outfield a little bit more. That apparently didn't happen. He's nonetheless a very exciting player. Ryan Clifford, I am still in on. I know he struck out a lot. I know, a lot of the peripheral numbers weren't pretty, but he hits the ball hard. He actually improved upon getting promoted to Double-A at 21 last year. So I'm in on Ryan Clifford. But he also defensively, of note to me at least, worked out, I believe, exclusively at first base, aside from maybe shagging flies during BP. So they say he can stick in the corners. He has a good throwing arm for right field, but feels like first base is the future for Ryan Clifford.
What about is there any buzz about like the pitching lab at all? We love talking about it on the podcast here. Is there like any sort of excitement that's felt inside the organization about what's going on with the pitching and just these random guys popping up looking great?
Yes, but not in an explicit, oh, thank God for the pitching lab way. The Mets have gotten to a place with the pitching lab, which is, what was that, middle of 2022, I want to say, 23. It's a couple years old now. So it's basically just part of how the organization operates. They sign these guys, they draft these guys, spend a lot of time Port St. Lucie. Pitching lab is just part of the development. They claim guys off waivers, guys popping in the offseason, early in camp. And it's just, it's not like, Reed Garrett really figured out his splitter because of the pitching labs. No, it's like they claimed Reed Garrett because they thought he could be nasty. They took a look, they did some things, and he had a little bit of a breakout year last year. So it's just going to be, I think, moving forward, the Mets, in their ideal version of events, becoming a little bit of a pitching factory for waiver claims, for prospects, for free agent signings like Luis Severino and Sean Manaea last year, and using that technology, that pitching infrastructure to help the guys make the most out of themselves, as opposed to, dead Neil Nunez popping out of nowhere last year and being like, thank God for the pitching lab. This is a win for the pitching lab. No, it's just how the Mets operate now. and it's part of their technology and infrastructure and all that.
Just to build on the pitching lab, because we're going to keep talking about the pitching lab. We love
Absolutely.
referencing the pitching lab over here. Has the Max Kranick mania, has the fervor hit Port St. Lucie the same way it's hit New York and Twitter? Because this guy seems like a pure revelation as like a late game multi-inning weapon, possibly someone who can grow into a starting pitcher at some point. But is there as much confidence internally as there is right now externally for Max Kranick?
Yes.
Hell yeah.
They like Max Kranick. They have liked Max Kranick. Really, he was in camp technically as a starter last year, kind of sort of in the competition, but not really. Got hurt with the hamstring early, and then shortly into the season, upon getting healthy, turned into a reliever. And the stuff ticked up. He started throwing a little harder, and he absolutely won some fans in the organization. Fans with power, decision-making fans within the Mets. And you saw it at the end of last year. They re-added him to the 40-man roster. And of all of the kind of random guys they could have added to the last bullpen slot for the first round of the playoffs, it was Max Kranick. And he didn't get into the game, but to me that spoke volumes about what the Mets thought of him. And he was only going to pitch in that series if it was a blowout, right? He was not going to be pitching in any meaningful innings because of short series, yada, yada. But the Mets like Max Kranick, and he's continued to impress in camp, and he's built up in basically a Jose Butto role. Multiple innings at a time, 2-3 innings, 45 pitches. And he's physically ready for that too. Kranick's already gone 3 innings in live BP. He's routinely gone multiple innings in exhibition games. So I put out my roster projection today on the Mets off day, and Kranick's on there, and comfortably on there as I was going down the depth chart and filtering through names. So
wow.
It'll be up to him to stay if and when he does break camp with the team, because he has options. He can be sent down if they need a fresh arm, all that usual roster minutia stuff. But that's what Jose Butto was last year too when he first came up. That's what Daniel Nunez was. He was a guy who's, we need somebody who can cover some innings if we need it in a pinch today. And they earn their way to higher leverage spots. And Max Kranick is going to have that same opportunity.
Was there any surprise with the announcement of outrighting Sean Reed-Foley? And does maybe Kranick's production kind of be the reason why you push a guy like Sean Reed-Foley out?
I don't know that I would connect those dots with a dot. I don't know that I would connect those dots with a line, maybe a dotted line. Mm-hmm. I was a little surprised because the Mets have really liked Sean Reed-Foley for a couple of years, for the times that he's been able to get on the mound. His shoulder is frequently a problem. We saw that last year, but then they kept him, avoiding arbitration, before the non-tender deadline. So that did surprise me a little bit. It did, however, make Max Kranick's path to the opening day roster much easier, because if you are taking Sean Reed-Foley off the 40-man roster, and if you're comfortable risking losing him to another team via waiver claim, then he's not in the opening day picture. Yeah. So that opened up another spot in my eyes. And yeah, so I was surprised by that. But, you're talking about like the 25th, 26th guy on the roster.
Who'd you have losing the roster spot to Kranick now? Because would you have Kranick, Nunez, and Reed Garrett all on this team together? Like who's out of that bullpen role for Kranick having that bullpen role?
Let's see. I'm going to try to do it off the top of my head. Newsday.com/Mets has my full roster projection.
Bang.
But the three locks to begin the year are Diaz, Stanek, Butto. I have Daniel Nunez being ready and healthy, but AJ Minter needing a little while. So that's 4 spots. And then it was Reed Garrett and Danny Young, who's out of options and showed something as a lefty last year. I think he fits better too as a second lefty as opposed to the top/only lefty, which was sort of a tough draw last year for him at times. So I like Danny Young at least to begin the year. And then the last 2 spots went to Kranick. And then I couldn't decide who to put for the 8th and final spot. So I picked Jose Urena, since he can cover a couple innings.
Nice.
Was solid last year in a swingman role, which the Mets might like, especially given that, starting pitchers don't pitch super deep early in the year, especially some of the names the Mets are probably going to end up with coming out of camp. So Urena has an opt-out. I figure maybe they keep him to preserve that organizational depth.
I wanted to also know, because Jose Iglesias got announced as signing today.
Yeah.
Obviously, there was an off day for the Mets, but do you think that there's going to be any sort of reaction or anything about that from Mets players and Mets management, seeing that he's not going to be on this team for sure next year or this year?
I guess probably not. I mean, that ship had pretty much sailed on day 1 or day 3 of spring training when David Stern spoke and pretty much said so.
Yeah.
That they were looking at others for the utility infielder role. At the time, of course, Nick Madrigal, who's now out for the year. Even when Madrigal got hurt, I rechecked with Mets people and said, does this change anything on the Iglesias front? And they said, no. So, Iglesias coming back was never really going to happen, which I think, and this might be a hot take, fans that I've talked to in real life, my friends who are Mets fans, don't love it, but Iglesias not being on the 2025 Mets is fine and even good for him, even if his heart is broken right now, because what he did last year was a 1 in a million outcome for a guy who signed a minor league deal. Between the production, the song, the fan favorite stuff, the manager favorite stuff, it was ridiculous. And if he had come back and stunk a little bit, which was possible, maybe probable, that he was obviously not going to repeat what happened last year, then it would have ruined things. But that he had a perfect one and done stay with the Mets means he can come back as many times he wants in the future, sing his song, show up to FanFest, and be a beloved alum for the rest of his life. And the Mets did Jose Iglesias a favor in preserving that for him. And and baseball-wise, they'll be just fine without him.
That's a good spin. I like that.
Yeah. It's also probably just good for this team just to be able to turn the page on that year.
Yes.
Like, the year was so special and so unique that it would be almost a disservice to try and bring last year into this year, because it's a new team. It's a new year. But I can't believe we've done 25 minutes now and not talked at all about the rotation. What's the level of confidence right now with Tyler McGill? How are the people feeling about Tyler McGill? Because we heard Carlos Mendoza on Without Territory the other day, and he spoke highly of Tyler McGill. Said he's a dude, said the stuff's amazing, said we're relying on him this year. Is that the company line right now on Tyler McGill?
That's the company line, and that has been the company line since like 2022 on Tyler McGill, when he was lighting it up in Double-A and about to come up and all that stuff. And I'm happy to buy it to a certain degree. And he did show something, I think, late last year when he came up for Blackburn, who had bumped him from the rotation and was, frankly, dominant. So there was a lot of growing Tyler McGill did last year as far as understanding how pitches work, doing his homework on opposing lineups, stuff like that. So that's good. I don't have him in the season opening rotation, barring further injury, and I think that's fine. He can be that next guy up in AAA when another starter inevitably goes down, or when they want to slot in a sixth guy, whatever. So I buy the Tyler McGill stuff, the company line, as you said, but I would buy it more if they put him in the bullpen, for real. Yeah. None of this dabbling stuff, none of this short series in the playoffs stuff. If he truly went to the bullpen and did what Max Kranick did, what Jose Buto's doing now, and give that a real earnest go as a transition, then that is really intriguing to me. And the Mets aren't there yet, obviously. They still believe. But depending on how things sort out, rotation depth-wise, performance depth-wise, maybe that happens by the end of the year. Who knows?
Yeah, I'm sure Kodai has a lot to do with this, too, because we finally saw him get into a game the other night. Yeah. He's starting to throw a little bit more. What's the expectation? He's going to be ready to go by opening day?
The expectation is he's going to be ready. But even when you're discussing it with Mets people and you are getting the company line, the caveat is right now.
Okay.
Because
great.
Kodai Senga's an enigma. Let's be honest. Last year was weird. Mets people at times were exasperated by their understanding or lack of understanding about what was going on, when he was going to pitch, where he was at. And so at the Mets officials at times seemed as in the dark as the public on the state of Kodai Senga.
Love
right that. Now, Kodai Senga seems happy. He seems upbeat in ways that he was not for a lot of last year. And that makes sense because he's healthy, he's throwing. He threw 2 innings in his first Grapefruit League game a couple of days ago. And last year, he didn't even get into a Grapefruit League game. He went down before the calendar even flipped to March. And as we know, barely pitched the entire year. So he could be, he's healthy right now. And actually, I was just thinking about this today. I was thinking about something Senga told me during a lengthy interview about a variety of things last year, that his whole baseball life was, and he was talking about high school at the time, when he was pitching as a high school pitcher, that he would pitch once and his shoulder would hurt. And then a while later, when his shoulder stopped hurting, he would pitch again and then his shoulder would hurt. So it's like, so the shoulder stuff is just literally his whole baseball life popping up now and then. And his whole thing has been pitching and his shoulder hurts and then pitching again and his shoulder hurts. So will that happen again this year? I don't know. It didn't in 2023. It hasn't this spring training. So he's healthy for now.
That's a great place to be. I want everyone to be healthy exactly
For now.
Who among us is not healthy for now?
Right? Especially now. Just be
Starling
healthy.
Marte, but
Starling Marte is not healthy for now. Last guy I want to talk about, I think this is the last one I have. Mark, if you have anything else, but David Peterson. What are the expectations after the big year last year? And also an electric first spring training start a few days ago.
I like David Peterson, and last year was awesome. Sub-3 ERA, made every start once he came back from the hip surgery on time. Some big balls moments in the playoffs out of the bullpen. There was a lot to like with David Peterson. I would be very, very impressed if he did all of that again, because as good as he is, as much as you can like David Peterson, he outpitched his peripheral or underlying numbers quite a bit last year. The Mets at times were saying a little bit to themselves, a little bit not to themselves of, okay, we'll see how long this lasts. And then it never lasted. Well, it was almost as if when Peterson got a taste of that success, he started carrying himself differently, including on the mound, and it became a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. So maybe that pays off in a big way this year. That said, if David Peterson is a sub-3 ERA guy in a full season, that would be
insane.
Really, really
shocking.
impressive.
Yeah, that'd be crazy.
I don't know that anybody's expecting that. So if we're being honest, there's probably a little bit of regression at least coming with David Peterson. So, if he can be a mid to back end guy, that would be a win for the Mets.
I know. I had 2 more questions here. One's going to be, we heard Francisco Alvarez this offseason talk about how last year was a really tough year for him, that there was a lot of things mentally and physically that just weren't going right for him. How's his attitude been this spring training? How's he look and feel?
His attitude's been good. He's been aggressively happy, like nice. Really excited for this season, which, let's be honest, is a big season for Francisco Alvarez. He's still only 23 years old, super young still, all that stuff. But it's year 3 of being the starting catcher for the New York Mets. And at some point, you kind of have to make good on that former top prospect in all of baseball billing, which he really hasn't quite yet. He's been, an average hitter?
Yeah.
Power went down, average went up last year. So it's time, I think. I think this year could be a big blossoming year for Francisco Alvarez. He put in a ton of work in the offseason on his swing, on his body and strength. He wants to play 130 games. He wants to hit a lot of home runs. So Francisco Alvarez expects big things. It feels like even more so than the past few years when he also expected big things. And I kind of believe him.
And then my other question was going to be, you said Jeff McNeil was smiling earlier with the ABS stuff. Has he been smiling outside of that? Has he been a little bit happier? We want to see happy Jeff over here on the
rate
podcast.
Of smiles for Jeff McNeil.
I think all involved want to see happy Jeff, most especially his teammates. So there hasn't been a huge sample size yet. Honestly, I just happened to notice because I was looking at the numbers, and spring training stats do not mean a lot. But Jeff McNeil came into camp saying that his spring training numbers mattered. He wants to get up to a hot start because his best years happen when he had a good spring training and he can just take that into the regular season.
Sounds
and then
so
after,
Jeff.
What's that?
That sounds so Jeff.
It sounds so Jeff. And then after 5 games, he was hitting like 0.78, and it's like, oh. But then he had a good day in Fort Myers on Sunday. He's had a couple knocks, so I'm not sweating whatever Jeff McNeil does in spring training. even if Jeff McNeil's sweating it a little bit. But I find myself defending Jeff McNeil more often than a lot of people because I think he's good. And he was really figuring it out in the second half last year before he got that freak broken wrist off a curveball that nicked him. So when he stopped trying to just touch the ball and poke it and started trying again to hit a ball hard, which is the whole point, things started working out for him. And he was mashing some dingers and having a much better second half overall. So he's taking that second half mindset into this new year, and I think that'll serve him well, as will his defensive versatility. He's fine at all of the spots he plays. So there's a lot of value to Jeff McNeil, even if part of the fan base tries to trade him like every 6 months.
Every day.
Yeah, every moment. It's crazy we live in a world right now where Jeff McNeil is one of the oldest players on the Mets entire team.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
You're telling me. Jeff McNeil was born 10 days before me, so now I'm like, oh my God. This is what have I become if Jeff McNeil yesterday felt like that old rookie who came up in 2018 after lighting up AA and AAA. So it is kind of funny. He's got some gray in the beard now. He looks grizzled. So I'm a Jeff McNeil believer still, very much so. And, if he can just be solid in the bottom third of the lineup, then the Mets are going to score a lot of runs.
Last one before we let you go. One bold prediction. It could be player-wise, it could be team-wise. What do you got?
Oh, man. One bold prediction. Ooh, I was just mulling this today. I think the bullpen could be absolutely nasty because the Mets have more dudes that they really, really like than they have spots. And that's especially true if Nunez is healthy and he doesn't completely blow out, which is possible. It's true if and when Minter comes back, because he's been so good for so long as a top lefty, late inning guy. It's awesome. Now, given what we know about reliever volatility and how difficult it is to predict their performance, it could be a train wreck by Memorial Day. Let's be honest. But I'm a believer. So bullpen's one, and then the other thing I'm totally drinking the Kool-Aid on. And for the record, I don't drink the Kool-Aid in a lot of spots. It feels like maybe I'm buying into a lot of stuff over the course of this. But one thing I'm absolutely a believer in is the Clay Holmes transition. Nice. I think he could be so good. I'm coming out with a story in a couple days, polling all of the hitters on the nastiest pitches in camp. Which is just a fun little exercise to learn about what guys think of their teammates on the other side. And let's just say Clay Holmes is featured prominently. So nice. I'm looking forward to putting that story together, and has just made me more of a believer in the whole Clay Holmes experiment.
James, you got anything, or is it time for us to
I'm hearing Tim say that about Clay Holmes. I didn't even want to bring up Clay Holmes in this because we're becoming so confident in him. I think the people even moved on past Clay Holmes now. We've moved past the need for Clay Holmes. I don't know what's the word for vigor. We got it all as much as we need.
Yeah, but Tim, let everybody know where they can find you. Thanks for coming on again. We do appreciate it, and what they can look forward to.
Happy to come on anytime. You can find me at newsday.com/Mets. That's where all our stuff is. And, of course, on Twitter at Tim B. Healey, TIMB as in boy, HEALEY. So it'll, of course, be another fun season for the Mets.
Can't wait. Tim, thanks so much.
Hell yeah. Thank you.